More than 620,000 miles of fences crisscross the American West. That's enough barbed wire to wrap around the Earth nearly 25 times. And right now, thousands of volunteers, scientists, and ranchers are working together to tear them down. From the pronghorn that can't jump over fences to the sage grouse that can't see the wire in time. This is the story of how a 150-year-old invention conquered the frontier, devastated wildlife migrations older than civilization itself, and how a growing movement races to undo the damage before it's too late. No matter where you stand in the western United States, on average, you're less than 2 miles from a fence. That number comes from Wenjing Xu, a researcher at UC Berkeley, and when you hear it, it reshapes how you think about the American West. We picture wide open spaces, endless horizons, freedom. But the reality on the ground reveals a landscape sliced into millions of fragments by wire that most of us never even notice. Xu herself explained it best. From a human perspective, fences are barely visible from afar. For animals that need to roam, however, every invisible fence line could be an actual barrier they have to figure out how to overcome. To understand how we got here, you have to go back to 1874. A farmer in DeKalb, Illinois, named Joseph Glidden used a modified coffee mill to twist short lengths of wire into sharp barbs, then wound them around a long strand. Legend has it, his wife Lucinda pushed him to find a way to fence in her garden. What he created changed the continent. His patent, number 157,124, was issued on November 24, 1874. And barbed wire production exploded from 10,000 pounds that year to 80.5 million pounds by 1880. A Texas salesman named John Warren Gates, known as Bet-A-Million Gates, pitched it to ranchers with a legendary line. "This is the finest fence in the world. It's light as air, stronger than whiskey, and cheaper than dirt." Native Americans called it something else entirely. They called it the devil's rope. Barbed wire didn't just reshape ranching, it ignited wars. By the fall of 1883, fence cutters had caused more than $20 million in damage across Texas alone. Small-scale stockmen and farmers who depended on the open range retaliated against those who fenced off public land by cutting wire in the night. At least 3 people died, including a Texas ranger named Ben Warren. Governor Ireland called a special legislative session in January 1884, making fence cutting a felony while ordering landowners to install gates every 3 miles. The fences won. By the late 1880s, barbed wire had overrun the frontier from Texas to Wyoming. And for a century and a half, it kept spreading, until more than 620,000 miles of it threaded through sagebrush steppe, grassland, and mountain valleys, often long after anyone remembered why a particular fence was built in the first place. Here's what that means for wildlife. In studies of western rangelands, researchers estimate that every year, 1 deer, elk, or pronghorn dies for every 2.5 miles of fencing. A study in northeastern Utah and northwestern Colorado found 1 dead ungulate for every 1.2 miles of fence. Young animals die at 8 times the rate of adults. Many aren't killed by the wire itself. They're separated from their mothers and die of starvation or predation. And then there's the pronghorn. The fastest land mammal in North America, capable of running 55 miles per hour, has been making a 200-mile migration through western Wyoming for over 6,000 years. It's the longest land migration in the lower 48 states. But pronghorn have a critical vulnerability. They don't jump. Unlike mule deer, pronghorn try to crawl under fences. A bottom wire just inches too low can block an entire herd. Their reluctance to jump means that common fencing types can completely halt their movement. Birds face a different kind of threat. Nearly 40% of lesser prairie chicken deaths in Oklahoma were caused by fence collisions. Sage grouse, the largest grouse in North America, are sometimes called B-52 bombers because their size makes it nearly impossible to maneuver around a fence once they spot it. A single 2-mile fence in Wyoming killed 21 sage grouse in one winter. The costs ripple outward. Wildlife vehicle collisions kill an estimated 1 to 2 million large mammals annually in the U.S., cause roughly 200 human deaths, and cost American drivers and taxpayers approximately $8 billion every year. Fences that block normal migration routes push animals onto highways, compounding the danger. But here's where this story turns. Across the West, the fences are coming down. In Oregon, the Natural Desert Association spent years pressuring the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to remove cattle from the Heart Mountain National Antelope Refuge. By 2012, volunteers had pulled over 300 miles of barbed wire from the refuge. In western Wyoming, the Upper Green Fence Initiative has modified or removed more than 700 miles of fencing since 2012. The Absaroka Fence Initiative has completed 25 projects, with 450 volunteers donating over 3,200 hours. At one event, 80 volunteers removed 3 miles of fencing, hauling out nearly 4,000 pounds of wire and posts. Wildlife-friendly fence design has become a science of its own. The top wire should be no higher than 42 inches, preferably 40, to let animals jump over. The bottom wire should be smooth and at least 18 inches off the ground, so Pronghorn can slide beneath. Those specifications sound simple, but the majority of fence-related ungulate deaths occur where the top wire exceeds 40 inches. Small changes save lives. For sage grouse, fence markers installed through Bureau of Land Management and Natural Resources Conservation Service programs have reduced collisions by 83% since 2010, preventing an estimated 2,600 strikes. At Trappers Point in Wyoming, wildlife overpasses and underpasses reduced vehicle collisions by 85% in their first year. The federal government has taken notice. In 2008, the Forest Service designated the path of the Pronghorn as the first federally protected migration corridor. The 2021 Infrastructure Act authorized $350 million for wildlife crossings. Since 2019, the Western Big Game Seasonal Habitat and Migration Corridors Fund has leveraged nearly $89 million across 86 projects. In March 2024, the Interior Department announced another $11.8 million for corridor restoration in 7 states. But it's not without friction. Jim Magana of the Wyoming Stock Growers Association has warned that corridor designations could give federal agencies tools to restrict livestock grazing. County officials in southwestern Wyoming worry that protections for the sublet pronghorn herd in Sublet County could impede economic development. When Governor Gordon designated the path of the pronghorn corridor, he trimmed 2 segments from the original proposal after opposition, leaving about 20% of the herd's range unprotected. Wyoming's pronghorn population has declined roughly 40% in recent decades. During the winter of 2022 to 2023, about 90% of the pronghorn migrating to the northernmost segments near Grand Teton National Park within the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem died. That wasn't just a number, it was a 30-year population low. Arthur Middleton, the wildlife ecologist studying these migrations, said it best: people don't make connections between the wildlife they want to see in Yellowstone and the conservation work that needs to happen here. Tony Mong, the wildlife biologist who chairs the Absaroka Fence Initiative, put it more simply. When asked whether ranchers and conservationists can find common ground on fence removal, he said, "Everyone can agree on this." The Wyoming Game and Fish Department has set a goal of converting 100% of fencing on its managed lands to wildlife-friendly designs by 2033. It's ambitious, but then again, so is stringing 620,000 miles of wire across a continent in the first place. The question now is whether we can untangle it fast enough. Thanks for watching and see you next time.